Hello everyone, today I'm going to be trying something different. I'm going to be trying some foundation paper piecing. I couldn't find a free pattern that I liked and I didn't want to pay for one in case I didn't like it, so I just kind of drew up my own. I wanted to make like a little aloe vera plant for my bookshelf quilt that I'm making. So I have two different greens here, one's a little bit darker than the other one, and that's what I'm going to be using for the leaves. I did watch some videos on how to do this, so hopefully I can figure it out and do it right. So basically I need to start with 1 and 2. And I have a add a quarter ruler here. I bought this one at my local quilt shop, but you can find them on Amazon. I'll leave some links in the description box below. So we need to fold that line that's in between 1 and 2 there. So I'm just going to pick which fabric I want my section 1 to be, and then make sure that it is large enough to cover that whole area, plus seam allowance, because we want to make sure that we get all of that in there. And then I'm just going to take my add a quarter ruler. It's got a little lip there, and I'm just going to trim it off. I watched Sandra K's video when she was doing her foundation paper piecing, and she made it look so easy, and that's why I wanted to try it. I'll leave a link to her channel in the description box below. So I'm just going to pin that in place so that it doesn't move around while I'm working. And then I'm going to take my background piece because that's what number 2 is supposed to be. I guess you could color them in or write it on. I didn't. I know exactly how I want this to be. So I'm just going to make sure that that's lined up with my edge there so that the seam allowance will be the same. And I'm just going to sew along that line, trying to be very careful that I stay on that line. My stitch length is at 1.2. Once I've sewn it, I'm just going to flip it over and give it a good finger press. And now we need to find the piece of fabric that I've allocated for number 3, which is my lighter shade of green. I'm just going to move my pin out of the way so that I can fold my paper properly. You could use a thicker cardstock or like a greeting card to do your folds here, but I just have the ruler and I figured why not use it. I did spend the money on the ruler, might as well put it to use. And you just need to be careful that you're actually folding right on the line, and I do double check quite often. Like I said, I've never done this before and this is my first time ever doing it, hoping that it turns out right. And then again, just taking my ruler and trimming off that 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's why this ruler is so great, because if you hook that little lip on there, you're going to get a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance every time. And then we're just going to take our next piece of fabric there and line it up with that seam allowance. Again, always making sure that your piece of fabric is big enough to cover that whole area, plus the seam allowance. This way it would probably be enough, but I'm not 100% sure, and I want to make sure that it covers. So I'm just going to move my scrap piece the other way and then cut off a bigger piece. I do feel like I'm wasting a lot of fabric here, but I've never done it before, so I want to make sure that I'm doing it right. I'm sure with time you would learn how to cut your pieces of fabric and not waste as much, but all those crumbs I'm just going to throw in my crumb bucket and then use them for another crumb quilt. And then again, I'm just making sure that everything is lined up nicely and it's smooth and I don't have any wrinkles anywhere, and I'm going to line that up nicely with the edge, making sure that when I do flip it over, it's going to cover that whole area. You could pin it in place every time, but I'm not. I'm just making sure that I'm holding it nice and firmly when I move it over to my sewing machine and then sewing along that line. And again, I am double checking all the time because I really don't want to have to rip these stitches out. These stitches are so tiny and I hate ripping out stitches to begin with, let alone such tiny ones. Let me know in the comments down below if you've ever tried any foundation paper piecing, and if you have, what your favorite patterns are, because I did enjoy this process. I just need a lot of practice with it, and I'd like to try some new patterns. Now I'm willing to pay for them because now I know I could do it. Again, I'm just going to finger press here. I'm not going to go to the iron every time. And then once I've done that, I'm going to flip it over again, and once again, use my ruler to fold that line and get my next piece of fabric ready, which will also be a background piece. And that piece is a little bit bigger, so I might have to cut out of my yardage. I'm not sure if I have a scrap that big or not, but I'll just dig through it. And if when you're folding it over, you feel like it's not wanting to fold right on that line because you stitched over it, it is okay to pop those stitches out of the paper there to loosen it so that you can fold right on the line there. And I'm constantly double checking too, because like I said, I've never done this before, so I'm not very fast at it. But I'll just do this first half of the plant here, and then I'll fast forward to the pot because I'm pretty sure you're getting the idea of how this is done. But let me know in the comments if you'd like a more detailed instruction on how to do this. It would be a much longer video. But here again, I'm just making sure that my background piece is going to come down far enough to cover for my seam allowance on all edges, because I don't want to end up being short. I've seen some people, they don't trim anything until after they've sewn it, but like I said, I watched Sandra K and she made it look so easy. And I kind of like cutting that 1/4 inch seam there right away, because then I have a perfect spot to line it up and it makes it a little bit easier for me. But I guess it's all personal preference. So once again, taking it over to the sewing machine and sewing it, I find that this makes a lot of little thread messes and there's a lot of snipping everywhere all the time. But what I did find with this paper piecing was that your sewing is much more precise and your points are like on par, like they are good. All right, and I'm just going to finger press this here, and then we have 4 sections done. And then I'm going to take my darker green again for that last little aloe plant part. I don't know what you would call this. I guess the little spiky leaves. But yeah, just do your fold and then take your ruler. And if you don't have an add a quarter ruler, you can just use a different ruler and then just line up your 1/4 inch line with the edge of the paper there, and then you could still get this accurate cut. And then again, just figuring out how I'm going to lay down my fabric to make sure that I'm going to get good coverage everywhere so that I can get that point nice. I don't want to have to fudge it around later or anything like that. And again, always double checking because, well, we all know Sara, and if there's one thing she's good at, it's screwing up. And I really didn't want to screw up on this one again because, like I said, I hate unpicking it. All right, we got that last little leaf stem done there, and now I just need to do one more background, and then I'm ready to do the other half of the plant. But I will just skip that part because I'm sure you get the idea here, and there's no need to watch me do the exact same thing over and over and over again. And I don't want this video to be too long because I know some people prefer not to watch longer videos. So I'm just going to trim off that last little section there, and that should be big enough, that green piece for my other side. And then I'm going to find a little scrap for my background here and then line it up and sew it down, and then we will be able to move on. And don't forget, we did start a Facebook group, and if you want to join our community, the link is in the description box below. Feel free to come and join us. So I'm just going to finger press this over, and then I'm going to pop a pin in there just to hold it in place until I'm done the whole block because I don't want anything to shift around while I'm working. And then once I've done the whole block, then I'll probably just stay stitch around the outer edge before I trim it just to make sure that everything's nice and clean. Okay, I'm just going to move my pin out of the way so I can get started on the other side, and then I will finish that and I'll come back and I'll meet you once I'm ready to do the little pot portion of it. All right, I have my last little piece of background fabric sewn on here, so I'm just going to give that a good finger press and pin it into place. And that way I can start on the bottom portion of this block, and that will be the pot. And I decided to do little stripes just because I figured that would be the easiest if I was doing this for the first time. But so far, I'm really liking the way this is looking, and I think once I have the little pot section done, it's going to look even cuter. So same thing as before, I'm just going to fold that over, and then right here, I did sew over that line quite a few times, so I do need to pop some stitches there, but like I said, that is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And trimming this was a little bit more difficult because there is quite a few layers there with all those seam allowances, but just go over it a few times if you need to and make sure that everything's cut. And then we are going to find our first piece of fabric, and I decided to go with a blue and gray striped pot. I just really like those colors and I thought it would look really good together. So it's basically the same thing as before, just line up your fabrics and sew down those lines, and then cut all your threads, and then come back and flip it over, finger press everything. This fabric was a little bit flimsier, so I did take it over to the iron and press it, but for the other ones I didn't have to. And again here, these strips are really narrow, but just making sure that you're folding right on the line. I kind of veered off there, so I had to come back and redo it. But like, take your time and then just make sure that it's right the first time so that you don't make a mistake like I usually do. I am learning to take my time. That way then there's not so many mistakes. So once I have that blue strip on there, I'm just going to grab from my darker gray here. And again, just lining it up with the edge of my fabric and then sewing along that line. But I think you can see that this block is actually fairly simple to do. It's just a bunch of straight lines and there's no tiny little fiddly pieces like there are on some blocks. So this would be a great block to start with if you wanted to try it. I did scan it into Google Drive, so I will leave a link to that in the description box below if you want to print this as a PDF and then try to make this block yourself. If you guys would like more detailed instructions on this, I don't know if I'm the best teacher, but I could definitely try because like I said, this is my first one. And I would really appreciate it if you would hit that thumbs up button. It does help my channel grow, and you guys have helped me reach my goals way sooner than I expected, and I am very grateful and thankful for that, and I appreciate every single one of you. But I think you get the idea here. It is fold along the line, flip the paper, cut, and then match up fabric and sew along the line. So I'm just going to kind of fast forward through the rest here, and then I'll meet you at the end there when I'm done my block. have finished the block, I sewed around the edge to stay stitch everything down. And I did have my seam allowance lines drawn on there, so I'm just going to cut along that outer edge there, just to make sure that my block is nice and even everywhere. And this is a lot of layers to go through, so you might have to press down a little bit hard or make sure you have a new blade. And there it is, all trimmed up. I'm going to add a border so that it fits onto my bookshelf quilt. And here's my bookshelf quilt. I have all my blocks done except for on the globe. I need to do a little bit of hand stitching and then I'm ready to do the shelf. So be sure to subscribe if you want to see how I put that shelf together. That video will be coming up next week. And thank you so much for everyone stopping in and watching. I appreciate every one of you.